disruptive persons from the hearing. I want to thank our witnesses for appearing and for your service to our nation. Over the last 2 months, we've heard from each of our combatant commanders that the threats we face today are more complex and more formidable than at any point over the last 30 years. Each raised grave concerns about how China, Russia, Iran, and North Korea are working together to reduce America's global influence, harm our alliances, and undermine our national security. Iran and North Korea are arming Russia with deadly effect in Ukraine. And China's no-limits partnership with Russia is paying off for both countries. Russia is getting critical economic assistance, rocket motors, and microelectronics from China. Putin is using the assistance to keep his economy afloat and to produce the missiles, aircraft, and other weaponry that is devastating Ukraine. China is getting cheap oil and vital missile technology and enriched uranium from Russia. Xi is using the assistance to help his economy recover and to fuel his breathtaking buildup of space-based and nuclear weapons. China is also buying over 1 million barrels of oil a day from Iran in defiance of Western sanctions. The Ayatollah is using the oil revenues to fund his nuclear ambitions, arm his terrorist proxies, and launch an unprecedented and unjustified direct attack on Israel. Putin supports the rapid modernization of our military, a budget that fully funds readiness to ensure we can fight tonight, and a budget that will improve the quality of life of our service members so we can recruit and retain the most lethal fighting force on the planet. Unfortunately, this budget does not do those things. The 1% increase it proposes entirely is inadequate. It actually is a 2% cut when you factor in inflation. But this is the hand dealt to us by the Fiscal Responsibility Act that we all have responsibility for enacting. As we move to mark up the FY25 NDA, we will play that hand that was dealt us. But we all need to understand the risk to our national security that this level of investment presents. I look forward to hearing from our witnesses about what this budget means for our military readiness, our modernization timeliness, and our efforts to improve service member quality of life. And most importantly, what this budget means for our ability to deter our increasingly undeterred adversaries. With that, I yield to my friend and colleague, the ranking member, for any opening statement he may have.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to welcome our witnesses, Secretary Austin, General Brown, Mr. McCord. Thank you for being here, and thank you for your leadership in very, very difficult times. I think the chairman laid it out fairly well. It can be summed up as big threats and a tight budget. And you have to figure out how to make that work. But as the chairman noted, we have that tight budget because that's what Congress passed and the president signed, so we will have to find a way to live within it. I think the national security strategy lays out those threats quite well. China, Russia, Iran, North Korea, and then various transnational terrorist groups, all of which are causing challenges across the world. I don't disagree with the chairman's assessment of those challenges, or how increasingly the problem is they are working together more and more to coordinate those threats in a way that are deeply challenging. We do want to hear today, obviously, about the two specific hottest spots right now, what's going on in Ukraine. It is good that Congress finally passed the aid package to Ukraine. The months of delay were very costly. Would be very interested in your military opinion about where the fight in Ukraine goes from here, in Ukraine's ability to hold off the assaults that are coming from Russia. In the Middle East, the war rages on with a continual threat that it could spread. I want to compliment the administration and Secretary Austin in particular, Chairman Brown, for the work to try and contain that, to work with our partners, to work with our allies. But that challenge continues. And I think it is even more important that President Biden continues his push to try to get a humanitarian ceasefire in Gaza with the release of the hostages. I know the president has been negotiating that. A number of terms have been put on the table. Hamas has repeatedly refused to accept that. I don't think we should stop trying to get to that humanitarian ceasefire going forward, and to work to make sure that we get more aid into Gaza. I know that we have begun to build the pier to help get aid in from the sea. Any and all efforts necessary must be put in place, which I very much appreciate. In terms of dealing with the big threats on that tight budget, I want to advance the idea, two things. One, we need partnerships and we need diplomacy. We cannot do it alone, and we cannot fight everybody everywhere all at once. We may not like a wide variety of things that these actors that we've talked about are doing. We have to live in the same world that they do, which means we have to talk to China. Yes, at some point, I believe we need to talk to Russia. We need to use our diplomatic skills and our partnerships and alliances, because one of the things I'm really worried about is that Iran, Russia, China, and the others, they're beginning to build partnerships. They're beginning to undermine our economic might. The chairman laid out how they are fighting back against our sanctions by working together. We cannot alienate the entire world and still meet these threats. We need the rest of the world on our side. So I hope we will consider building on the partnerships and diplomacy that we have used. I think the AUKUS agreement is a great example, the Quad that we've used, the 54-nation partnership that was pulled together to help Ukraine fight off Russia. All those are good examples, but we need to build on that. Lastly, I just want to foot-stomp what the chairman said about recruitment and retention. Thank him and thank the Quality of Life panel, Representative Houlihan, Representative Bacon led, which is focused on making sure that we give our servicemen and women and their families everything they need and give them the support. They are the backbone of our military, without any question, and they deserve our support. With that, I look forward to the testimony, and I yield back. Thank you.
I thank the ranking member. Our witnesses today are the Honorable Lloyd Austin, Secretary of Defense, General C.Q. Brown, Chairman of the Joint Chiefs. Accompanying the Secretary and the Chairman is the Honorable Mike McCord, Undersecretary of Defense. He serves as the DoD's Chief Financial Officer and is available to answer questions. No small job, given that he's the Chief Financial Officer of the largest organization on the planet. With that, we will recognize our first witness, Secretary Austin. We'll start with you.
Chairman Rogers, Ranking Member Smith, distinguished members of the committee, thanks for the opportunity to testify in support of President Biden's proposed fiscal year 2025 budget for the Department of Defense. Pleased to be joined by our outstanding Chairman of the Joint Chiefs, General C.Q. Brown, and by Undersecretary Mike McCord, the Department's Comptroller. Let me start by thanking this committee for all that you do to support the U.S. military, our troops, and our military families. As Secretary, I have always been guided by three priorities: defending our nation, taking care of our families, taking care of our people, and succeeding through teamwork. Our budget request for fiscal year 2025 will advance all three of these priorities. First, the President's request will invest in cutting-edge capabilities across all domains. That includes $48.1 billion for naval and shipbuilding capabilities, $62.1 billion to reinforce U.S. air dominance, and $13 billion to bolster Army and Marine Corps combat capabilities. Our request will also provide $33.7 billion to strengthen our space architecture and $14.5 billion to develop and field advanced cybersecurity tools. It will direct $49.2 billion to modernize and recapitalize all three legs of our nuclear triad. And it will sharpen our tech edge through a $167.5 billion investment in procurement and $143.2 billion in R&D. Second, this budget will support our outstanding troops and their families. That includes raising base pay and housing allowances, investing in better housing, making child care more affordable, and funding vital work to prevent sexual assault and suicide in the military. And third, this request will help the department further deepen our teamwork worldwide. Our network of allies and partners remains a strategic advantage that no competitor can match. And you can see its power in our strengthening ties across the Indo-Pacific, in today's expanded and united NATO, and in the 50-country Ukraine Defense Contact Group that I convene. Our budget remains rooted in our 2022 National Defense Strategy. Our request positions the United States to tackle the department's pacing challenge, the People's Republic of China, with confidence and urgency. It will help meet the acute threat of Putin's increasingly aggressive Russia. It will help us tackle the persistent dangers from Iran and its proxies. It will help us take on threats from North Korea, global terrorist organizations, and other malign actors. And it will help us continue to deter aggression against the United States and our allies and partners, and to prevail in conflict if necessary. Now today, I want to underscore three key messages. First, even as our budget request abides by the mandatory caps set by the Fiscal Responsibility Act, it is aligned to our strategy. We made tough but responsible decisions that prioritize near-term readiness, modernization of the joint force, and support for our troops and their families. Our approach dials back some near-term modernization for programs not set to come online until the 2030s. Second, we can only reach the goals of our strategy with your help. And I'm truly grateful that Congress passed the fiscal year 2024 appropriations in March. And the single greatest way that Congress can support the department is to pass predictable, sustained, and timely appropriations. My third and final message is that the price of U.S. leadership is real, but it is far lower than the price of U.S. abdication. As the President has said, we are in a global struggle between democracy and autocracy, and our security relies on American strength of purpose. And that's why our budget request seeks to invest in American security and in America's defense industrial base. The same is true for the recently passed National Security Supplemental that will support our partners in Israel, Ukraine, and Taiwan, and make key investments to increase submarine production. In fact, about $50 billion of this supplemental will flow through our defense industrial base, creating good jobs, good American jobs, in more than 30 states. So we're grateful for our partners in Congress who help.
How can you talk about U.S. leadership when we're supporting genocide in Gaza?
Committee will come to order.
Secretary,
I'd like to formally request those in the audience causing disruption to cease their actions immediately.
weapons are being used against
Security, I'm going to ask you to remove
international
the disruptive persons.
law. It is illegal, it is immoral, it is disgusting. The whole world is watching what we are doing in Gaza right now. Secretary General, you are supporting a genocide. Stop supporting genocide. Free Palestine. Stop supporting genocide.
Apparently, the protesters don't understand we don't have a Secretary General in this country. With that, Mr. Secretary, you're recognized again.
Thank you, Chairman. We're grateful for our partners in Congress who help us make the investments needed to strengthen America's security through both the supplemental and the President's budget requests. The U.S. military is the most lethal fighting force on earth, and with your help, we're going to keep it that way. And I deeply appreciate your support for our mission and for our troops, and I look forward to your questions. Thank you, sir.
General Brown, you're now recognized.
Chairman Rogers, Ranking Member Smith, and distinguished members of the committee. I'm honored to join Secretary Austin and the Honorable Mike McCord to appear before you today. On behalf of the Joint Force, Department of Defense, civilians, and our families, I want to thank Congress for your steadfast support and the opportunity to testify on the fiscal year 2025 defense budget request, which reflects our shared commitment to national security. I also want to thank you for passing the National Security Supplemental, which provides vital support to our allies, partners, and our defense industrial base to counter aggression and strengthen our joint force capabilities and capacity in preparation for any future contingency. The global security environment is increasingly complex. The 2022 National Defense Strategy identifies 5 key challenges. The People's Republic of China, our pacing challenge, continues its risky behavior around the globe. The newly aggressive Russia with its unprovoked war against Ukraine. A reckless Iran, who, as we saw a few weeks ago, attempts to escalate regional conflict with unprecedented attacks and support of proxy forces. A destabilizing North Korea, which threatens regional security, and violent extremist organizations which leverage instability to advance their cause. These challenges are interconnected, which demands a strategic approach addressing the immediate threats while also preparing for future contingencies. It requires all of us to operate with a sense of urgency. Days after becoming the chairman, I laid out 3 expectations in my message to the Joint Force. Honing our warfighting skills has primacy in all we do. Modernizing and aggressively leading with new concepts and approaches. And trust is the foundation of our profession. Our military exists to fight and win our nation's wars. We train every day to ensure we are so good at what we do that we deter any adversary from engaging the U.S. in conflict. This budget requests $147 billion to sustain readiness and ensure the department can counter near-term threats. We are also focused on better integrating our allies and partners in our planning and operations by investing in critical programs and
Suspend. We will remain in recess until the disruptive individuals are removed from the chamber. General, you may proceed.
Sure. We are all focused on better integrating our allies and partners in our planning and operations by investing in critical programs and capability, expanding security cooperation, exercises, training, and interoperability. Our investments in readiness ensure the Joint Force can respond when the nation calls. While we are focused on readiness for today, it is critical to modernize and lead with new concepts to prepare for tomorrow. The Department continues to invest in capability and capacity to outpace our competitors while transforming from costly legacy platforms that are no longer relevant to the threat. This budget strategically invests $167.5 billion in procurement, underscoring our commitment to equip the Joint Force with unparalleled combat capabilities across every domain. This budget also invests $143.2 billion in research, development, tests, and evaluation of future capabilities that will retain our strategic edge. Finally, this budget invests significantly in nuclear modernization, digital innovation, multi-year procurement of critical munitions, and the strengthened defense industrial base. With rapidly evolving threats and technologies, accelerating our modernization is crucial. Lastly, trust is the foundation of our profession. The Joint Force must build upon and uphold the trust in each other. Trust with our families, trust of our elected leaders, and trust of our nation. Enhancing the quality of service and the quality of life of our personnel is not just a moral obligation, it's a strategic imperative. This budget includes investments in quality of service efforts such as advanced training, educational benefits, and career development, while also investing in quality of life projects like housing, medical clinics, and child care facilities, as well as funding spouse employment initiatives, enhanced mental health resources, and robust programs to combat sexual assault. We must create an environment where all can reach their full potential. Trust that our Joint Force stands ready to defend our national interest, ready to deter aggression, and ready, if necessary, to fight and win our nation's wars. I thank you for your support and collaboration and our shared commitment to face the security challenges of today and prepare for tomorrow. We are living in consequential times, and there's no time to waste. Thank you, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, General. I recognize myself for opening questions. General, I addressed this first question to you. You talked about what the budget would do. As we know, we talked about this is a tight budget. Tell me what we can't do with this budget. Tell me about some of the trade-offs that you've had to make as a result of this 1% increase.
Well, Chairman, I appreciate the question. As the Secretary highlighted in his opening remarks, what we had to do is we focused on readiness for the near term. And as we did that, there's some areas that we elected not to modernize, some capabilities that would deliver in later into the 30s. And so that's where we had to address some of the shortfalls in this particular budget by making those choices to focus on readiness.
For example, give me an example of something that you deferred.
I'd have to get you more detail, Chairman. But as we look at various capabilities, and I would say munitions is a key one of those that we've focused on, as well as we look at our shipbuilding, our sub industrial base as well, and aircraft.
How is this budget going to affect your training? Do you have an idea about that?
Well, not much, because we actually did focus on our readiness, and that's why the $147 billion is to focus on our readiness. We are very capable Joint Force, And using the capabilities we do have today while we pursue future modernization is where our focus is on readiness today, Chairman.
Okay, I would ask this to both of you. I know you've got to be concerned about this growing cooperation that we're seeing between Russia, China, Iran, and North Korea. Do you feel like that this budget adequately resources our ability to deter their organized and unified aggressive behavior in the coming years, Mr. Secretary?
Thanks, Chairman. The growing nexus between the PRC, Russia, and the DPRK and Iran is concerning, and this is something that we are watching very closely. As we look at what Russia is doing, because of the damage that Ukraine inflicted on Russia's land forces, Russia turned then to DPRK for additional munitions and in the form of artillery munitions and missiles. Iran is providing Russia with drone capability, technology, and actual drones themselves, and that's made a difference in Russia's ability to recover from what the damage that Ukraine has inflicted on them. And then North Korea, again, it's becoming more confident because of its affiliation with Putin. So this is very concerning. Something that we're going to have to watch, something that we're going to have to make sure that we have the capability and capacity to work with our allies to continue to deter and continue to promote peace and stability in each of the regions. But to your point, very concerning and something that we're going to have to stay on top of going forward. So.
General Brown?
I would echo the Secretary's comments about it being very concerning and watching how these countries are working and somewhat interconnected. By the same token, what I have seen in the 7 months, tomorrow will be 7 months I've been in the job. I've engaged about 170 times with my counterparts from around the world. And what I've found is as the world has gotten more complex, the work with our allies and partners has strengthened. We watch how NATO has strengthened. NATO is larger, but as I engage with nations in Europe, they're focused on the Indo-Pacific, and the Indo-Pacific nations are also focused on Europe because all these are it's a global threat to all of us. And that dialogue is definitely increased, and I've seen that happen in the jobs I've held as a senior leader.
When you talk to your counterparts around the world, what resources would they like to see us bring to the table as a part of that effort to combat or deter the behavior you just described?
Well, what I would highlight is they're concerned about our collective defense industrial base and bringing capability. One thing I do find as I engage around the world is that U.S. capability, U.S. equipment is highly desired. And we've got to be able to provide that capability and equipment, and those are the things that they are keenly interested in. They're also interested in our ability to work and be able to interoperate, even when they have their own defense industrial base that they're also trying to increase as well. And so it's how we work together and to break down barriers, to be able to work across our industries, across our services, or across our governments will be important.
Thank you, General. I yield to the ranking member.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Obviously, there's a ton of topics we could cover. I just want to ask one question, and that is on recruitment and retention. I know, Secretary Austin, this has been a particular focus of yours for some time. Can you update us on how we're doing? Obviously, the pandemic was a huge challenge coming out of that. There have been other challenges. Where are we at, in your opinion, on being able to recruit and retain the service members we need?
You're right, sir. COVID really caused us a significant problem in our inability to get into high schools and work the areas that we typically work for recruiting. Post-COVID, we have been able to reverse those trends, get back into the high schools, to advertise in the right markets, to reestablish contacts with centers of influence. Each of the services has made a concerted effort to hire the right kinds of recruiters and put the right kinds of recruiters, out there to represent the services, and that's proving to be very, very helpful. As we look at where we are right now, we see the curves beginning to bend. and in favor of more productivity. I expect that Army, Air Force, Space Force, and the Marines will all make mission this year, just based upon their forecasts. And I attribute that to their hard work. I mean, they've been doing a lot to reverse these trends. And you know, this is the tightest job market that we've seen in a very, very long time. So there are plenty of jobs for people to have or to get, and so this has been very competitive. But I think the services are doing the right thing, and again, I have to attribute this to their hard work and their focus. The senior leaders are focused on this in a major way, and I talk to them about this routinely. On top of that, retention is the highest that it's been in a very, very long time. And so when troops join us, they want to stay with us. And a good part of that is because of what you continue to do to help resource us to provide for them and their families. So.
Thank you. General Brown. You have
Well, thank you. As the Secretary highlighted, we do see a positive trend. And since I've been not only as a service chief watching this and coming through COVID and watching the numbers change, but also as a chairman, I've had a chance to sit down and meet with recruiters from all of our services. I've gone to one of our processing centers to take a look and ask questions about the things we can do to increase the throughput through our recruiting stations. At the same time, it's how we engage. And one of the things when I talk about trust, it's how we that have served, what inspired us to join, and how we inspire the next generation, and how we engage and show all the opportunities that are available by serving in our force or serving the nation at large. And so we do see some positive trends. And I would also say the same thing with retention. The numbers, we're meeting all of our retention, and we're doing very well there. But we got to continue. We can't rest on our laurels, and that's why the support of this committee and the Congress, particularly as you look at the quality of life, does play a role because it plays a role not just for the member, but it plays a role for their family as well.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Chair, now recognize the gentleman from South Carolina, Mr. Wilson.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and thank each of you for being here and your service on behalf of our country. And to me, it's so clear that the primary function of the national government is to do for us what we cannot do for ourselves, and that's national defense. And so your service is more important than ever. And putting that in the context, too, what we're talking about is deterrence of peace through strength. And so what you're doing could not be more important. And I particularly appreciate military service. I have 4 sons who have served in Egypt, Afghanistan, and Iraq. My Navy son, the benefit of military service is so exciting. My son served as a Navy doctor in Naples. I now have 3 grandchildren who speak perfect Italian. So I look at military service as opportunity to serve, but opportunity for fulfilling and meaningful life. And so what you're doing, and I'm so happy to hear about retention being good, Mr. Secretary, that's great. Putting that in perspective, too, your service today is more important than ever. It's been referred to in bipartisan with the terminology by Ranking Member Smith of partnerships among adversaries. The leadership that we have with Chairman Mike Rogers, who stood up against the dictators, and then your reference to authoritarians or autocrats against democracy. I like to phrase it as dictators with rule of gun who are invading democracies with rule of law. This is not a war that we chose. This is a war that war criminal Putin chose on February 24, 2022, when he invaded Ukraine and conducted mass murder. This is another indication with the invasion by Iran with its puppets of Hamas of Israel on October 7. And we need to do all we can to deter the Chinese Communist Party from an invasion of the terrific country of Taiwan. With all of this in mind, over and over again, we should be grateful. And I am very happy, General Brown, that this week it's reported that finally that long-range attackers have been provided to the people of Ukraine to defend their country, provided by Germany, the United Kingdom, and now the U.S. Additionally, I hope that cluster bombs are provided as quickly as possible. We have excess that need to be destroyed. I know a way to destroy them. and that is to send them to the people of Ukraine. It's been reported that War criminal Putin is jamming various precision munitions, causing lower accuracy rates for targeting than advertised. And it's very important that we equip Ukraine with the latest technology. With F-16s being provided to Ukraine by the Netherlands and Denmark, will the department be considering to have joint air-to-surface standoff missiles to be more advanced precision fires of the F-16s in the delivery package to Ukraine? General Brown.
Well, as we bring on the F-16s, it's the not only the airplanes, but it's the training of the pilots, also training of the maintenance, but also bring sure we have the weapon system to go with it. And that's part of the conversation we're having with the countries that are not only contributing F-16s, but as part of the Ukraine Defense Contact Group, there is an Air Force coalition that the United States is part of, and that is the dialogue that we're having to not only just get to the airplanes, but also get it to a full capability.
And a good news, Secretary Austin. In December, Japan announced it's transferring Patriot interceptors back to the U.S. to replenish our stockpiles. Earlier this month, there was a joint statement with Japan. The administration wants to pursue co-development and co-production of missiles for forward deployed in the Indo-Pacific. This is great for the Indo-Pacific. It really follows, indeed, NATO coming together with Sweden and Finland, the assistance by the EU, of all people, for the people of Ukraine, for Europe. But with the Indo-Pacific, are there other examples of defense cooperation agreements that can be pursued to deter the dictators who seek to destroy Western civilization?
Well, thanks, sir. As you know, we have done a lot of work to strengthen our relationship with the ROK. We have promoted a trilateral relationship between the ROK, Japan, and us. As you witnessed months ago, the President held a summit here in the United States with the leadership of those three countries. We've strengthened our relationship with the Philippines. And so now we have the ability to operate alongside the Filipinos in more sites in the Philippines. And 3 years ago, the leadership was going to disinvite us and not allow us to operate in the Philippines. But that relationship...
Hey, Mr. Secretary, my time is up. But again, it's exciting to see countries come together that we have not before, from the Philippines to Sweden and Finland. Thank you very much.
Gentleman's time has expired. Chair, and I recognize the gentleman from Connecticut, Mr. Courtney.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to both witnesses for your diligent service and your testimony today. Mr. Secretary, one of the smartest actions which Congress and your department made last year was enacting AUKUS authorities. I want to particularly compliment your legislative team who worked with a number of us on the committee to successfully steer a very complex package into last year's NDAA. As you laid out on page 16 of your testimony, it's not just an aspirational plan. AUKUS is moving out fast on many fronts. For example, I had the pleasure to welcome the first 3 Aussie naval officers to sub school at the Groton Sub Base in Connecticut, where they learned proficiency in the operation of nuclear-powered submarines, a key AUKUS Pillar 1 goal. All 3, by the way, graduated in the top 5 of their class, and another 100 of their colleagues are going to be following in their footsteps. Mr. Secretary, having been on this committee for quite a while, it was quite striking to me the amount of focus in your statement on the need to grow and strengthen our nation's defense industrial base. On page 20 of your written testimony, you highlighted the department's publication last January, the National Defense Industrial Strategy, which was a first for the department to its credit. And that report honestly laid out, warts and all the painful history of neglect of that base, which goes back decades, and acknowledged particularly the damage that procurement instability from the Pentagon has done. Coming from a district with a submarine shipyard that was decimated by such instability from 1990 to 2010, I could not agree more. Over the past 13 years, however, Congress has led the way to stabilize that yard and other yards and their supply chains with steady 2 Virginia submarine per year procurement, and the workforce has rebounded from a low of 9,000 to 23,000 today. COVID's pandemic did slow down production, and it's undeniable that the recovering pace needs to continue to pick up. But I would note that contrary to the narrative coming out of the department, starting last fall, of 2023, 4 submarines have been or will be delivered to the Navy by the end of 2024. USS Rickover, New Jersey, Massachusetts, and Iowa, and Idaho and Arkansas are slated to be delivered in 2025. The supply chain has rebounded as well, with Congress's SIB investments going back to 2018. Those investments need to continue, but so does procurement stability. Unfortunately, the 2025 budget plan has injected unexpected new instability by cutting a sub, a direct deviation from last year's fit-up in the Navy's shipbuilding plan. And I would argue is also contradicts the National Defense Industrial Strategy's warning about the need to maintain procurement stability. As the Wall Street Journal powerfully noted, U.S. submarine technology is a crown jewel of America's military power and a true advantage over a rapidly expanding Chinese naval fleet. Buying only one boat is a terrible signal for capital investment, and it tells adversaries that the U.S. is not serious about rearming. I don't totally buy that last comment, but I would say that having been home since the budget came out, I've talked to supply chain companies who are hitting the pause button on planned investments. This has a real ripple effect when that signal shows instability. One of the provisions of the AUKUS authorities was in the NDAA, Section 1352, is something that I think is really at the center of what we did last year, which is that it authorized the President of the United States to certify the sale of 3 Virginia-class submarines starting in 2032, 2035, and 2038. That President has to certify, when that time comes, that those sales are not going to degrade our own fleet. Nobody in this room knows who that President will be after the 2028 election, but to me, I want to make sure that that decision is as easy as possible to make sure that the goal of AUKUS is going to be achieved. Cutting a sub from the inventory, which is what this budget proposal unfortunately does, in my opinion, makes that decision harder. We're going to work hard on this committee, and my colleagues are already hard at work in terms of getting requests over to the Appropriations Committee. We did it in 2007. We did it in 2013 under the Obama administration. We did it in 2020 under the Trump administration. Again, I think it is so important for the goal of AUKUS, which again I think is going to be one of your hallmark achievements, that we maintain procurement and we, as I said, make that decision in the early 2030s as early as possible. I don't have a question for you today, but again, with that, I'll yield back. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank the gentleman. Chair now recognizes gentleman from Ohio, Mr. Turner.
Secretary Austin, General Brown, and Mr. McCord, thank you for being here. Thank you for your leadership. Secretary Austin, I know you are aware that last week our ambassador to the United Nations, in conjunction with the Japanese, brought forth a resolution to the UN Security Council asking for all nations to prevent a dangerous nuclear arms race in outer space and to calling for a prevention of a nuclear arms race in space. This resolution was blocked, vetoed by Russia, and abstained by China. Secretary Austin, what would be the effect if a nuclear device was detonated today in outer space?
It would have devastating consequences on a lot of our capabilities in space, not only our capabilities, but the capabilities of other countries. And so for that reason, we think it's irresponsible for anybody to even consider deploying or employing a nuclear device in space.
Well, Mr. Secretary, General Michael Traut, the commander of Germany's Military Space Command, agrees with you. He stated the worst-case scenario of an indiscriminate nuclear blast in space, radiating out at a satellite-frying electromagnetic pulse across low Earth orbit would be devastating, as you had said, for everyone. If somebody dares to explode a nuclear weapon in high atmosphere or even space, this would be more or less the end of the usability of that global commons of orbit. Deploying a nuclear weapon in space would also be counter to the United Nations Outer Space Treaty of 1967. In addition, it would have catastrophic effects on civilian use of space and our commercial use of space. Mr. Secretary, why would someone put a satellite in space that has nuclear capabilities to detonate a weapon in space as opposed to just use a missile or an ICBM to detonate a nuclear weapon in space?
Certainly, a device like that would have could have a much more extensive impact and cover more ground, for lack of a better term, with one device than an anti-satellite weapon, which is directed towards a specific target. This thing would take away large swaths of capability, and as you pointed out, not just our capability, but also allies and partners, and so we don't really fully know or understand what the full effects would be. It would depend upon the yield of the weapon, the orbit that it was in, and all those things. But certainly it would have.
Mr. Secretary, wouldn't one of the reasons why they'd put it in space as opposed to shoot an ICBM or missile is because an ICBM or missile could be attributed as a nuclear weapons attack on a country and would have a nuclear weapons response?
That's right. If it was an attack on one of our terrestrial capabilities, sure. But they also have the opportunity or the ability to use a ground launch capability to attack a satellite and take out some capability that's on orbit.
Mr. Secretary, John Plum, the Assistant Secretary of Defense for Space Policy, told reporters on April 5th that Washington was in discussions with Russia about the weapons plans and apparent confirmation that Moscow is at least engaging on the topic. Is Russia developing an anti-satellite weapon with nuclear capabilities?
Certainly, I would not want to get into a discussion of intelligence information in an open hearing, but certainly we can have that discussion.
Right. So, Mr. Secretary, the reason why I ask you the question and the reason why you're stumbling is because the Biden administration refused to declassify this information. So we're not able to have an open public discussion. But one thing I'm concerned about is that, Mr. Secretary, in your entire written testimony, you never mention anti-satellites as a threat. You certainly don't even mention nuclear weapons as a threat, but the administration's moving forward trying to get the UN Security Council to take action. I believe that this is the Cuban Missile Crisis in space, and this administration is sleepwalking itself into an international crisis. And I certainly want to encourage you to encourage the administration to declassify this and take every actions necessary to avoid this space race that could, as our ambassador to the United Nations says, be a nuclear weapons space race.
Gentleman's time's expired. Chair now recognizes the gentleman from California, Mr. Garamendi.
Thank you. My colleague from Connecticut talked about cutting a sub. We make choices here, as you do at the Department of Defense also. Mr. Secretary, on December 9th, 2022, you gave a speech where you said, nuclear deterrence isn't just a numbers game, and that thinking can spur an arms race. You stressed the importance of working to reduce the global role of nuclear weapons, which we just heard from our colleague, and I happen to agree. For years, I've questioned the viability and the premise of the Sentinel program. In December, the Department of Defense announced that the ever-escalating cost of the Sentinel program, now estimated at least $137 billion, had breached the critical non-recurring limit, and that by law, the program must be terminated unless you, Mr. Secretary, certify that the program is, 1, essential to national security, 2, that there are no alternatives to the program, 3, that the new cost estimates are reasonable, and 4, that the program is a higher priority than programs whose funding must be reduced. Am I correct in saying that you are aware of your task that lies ahead?
I am, sir.
I'm pleased to hear that, because even without the required analysis by law that the Sentinel program, far too many Pentagon leaders have said, and I quote, "The Sentinel will be funded. We'll make the trades." Mr. Secretary, can you assure us that you will require that a truly fulsome and critical analysis of the Sentinel program will be made, and that the alternatives, for example, a submarine, will not be funded so that the Sentinel program can go ahead?
I can assure you that we will conduct a thorough analysis in accordance with Nunn-McCurdy Act responsibilities and the responsibilities that you've outlined as well. So.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. I believe you have until sometime in July to make that decision, and along the course in early May or late May, you will, General Brown, provide to the committees the analysis required by law. Is that correct?
We will. We'll support the timeline to enable the Secretary to make his determination.
In your opening remarks, General Brown, you said that, quote, "Our investment in nuclear capabilities reflects a judicious balance between advancing cutting-edge technologies and phasing out legacy capabilities." Fourth grade math would indicate that at $700 million a copy, $137 billion can buy you somewhere more than 120 B-21 bombers complete with an ISRO, or perhaps 7 Columbia-class submarines for $137 billion. Choices to be made here. Is an attack submarine important? Is an additional 120 or so B-21 bombers, complete with an LSRO, important? More important than a Sentinel? Can the Minuteman III be life extended? And by the way, committee members, why do we consistently write into the NDAA that there must be 400 ICBMs? There's been no analysis to indicate that. And has the Joint Requirements Office Oversight Council actually revisited the military requirements necessary for the nuclear enterprise? Has that been done, General Brown?
That is part of their task, is to continue not just on the nuclear portfolio, but across all of our portfolios for our joint warfighters.
I await that analysis. I yield back.
Chair now recognizes the gentleman from Colorado, Mr. Lambert.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Secretary Austin, your written testimony says that the fiscal year 25 budget invests in air and missile defense systems, which will, quote, "preserve our ability to deploy combat credible forces when needed," unquote. However, the Missile Defense Agency's budget you delivered to Congress was almost $1 billion below fiscal year 24 budget projections. It canceled, cut, or delayed several munitions programs. In fact, the day after I protested these cuts recently to the director of the Missile Defense Agency, Iran launched a direct and massive attack on Israel that included over 100 ballistic missiles, 30 cruise missiles, and 150 attack drones. Yet we have limited stocks, and we have allies and friends who are desperate for us to give them some of our limited stocks. So why did the department choose these drastic cuts to missile defense at a time when we need it more than ever to protect our homeland and our allies and partners?
Well, thank you, sir. As I stated earlier, because of the FRA, we did have to make some choices, and they were always tough choices. And we recognize that we needed to invest in current readiness, and we put a $147 billion request on the table to do that. And going forward, we will invest in those things that we weren't able to invest in this budget if we get support for an increased top line in the out years.
Okay, the chairman asked you both specifically to give an example of something that's been deferred, and I've got one here I'd like to refer to. The budget you've submitted also delays the glide phase interceptor. This would be a defense against hypersonic weapons until after 2035. That's 11 years from now. And yet they have this capability today, Russia and China both, especially China. So how is this meeting the threat of hypersonics when we have this threat staring at us today, to put it off till 2035?
Yeah, again, for those capabilities, those investments that wouldn't deliver capabilities until after 2030, for this current budget, we decided to not invest in that, but invest in that in later years. So.
Well, thank you for clarifying that, but I'm thinking we need to re-examine. There's a lot of priorities here, but this is one we've got to re-examine. Also, changing gears to nuclear deterrence, when the Biden administration came into office, one of its first acts was to offer an unconditional 5-year extension on the New START treaty. I believe this was a short-sighted gift to Vladimir Putin. According to the State Department, Russia is now in its second consecutive year of violating the New START treaty. And last year, the Strategic Posture Commission, a bipartisan committee composed of great experts, published its report that described the current nuclear modernization program of record as being necessary but insufficient, given China's breathtaking increase in nuclear capability. General Brown, I'll ask you this one. So neither Russia or China are appearing at all interested in coming to the negotiating table, and yet we now have the growth of a third nuclear superpower in this world. So, and New START treaty is probably going to expire in 3 years without being renewed by the Russia and the U.S. What should we be doing to prepare for that eventuality?
Thanks for the question. And what I would say is what we need to do is not only thinking about the treaty, and I realize that'll be policymakers, but from my perspective as a chairman, as a warfighter, is making sure we are getting capability in our nuclear portfolio, but also a conventional portfolio. I sat down with the Strategic Posture Commission. We talked not only about our nuclear portfolio, but also our conventional capabilities as well. And what's really important to be able to do that is to have consistent funding, consistent demand signal to provide that capability as we work with our defense industrial base. And those are the things we'll need to do. As the Secretary highlighted, right now we're focused on readiness based on the Fiscal Responsibility Act. But as we look to the out years, we do need to focus on not only identifying the capability, but giving it consistent funding and then being able to accelerate that capability into the hands of our warfighters.
Okay, well, thank you both. We are addressing some of the immediate needs right now, I believe, in a good way, but we really need to look at these out years for what's going to be coming down later. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank the gentleman. Chair, and I recognize the gentleman from New Jersey, Mr. Norcross.
Thank you, Chairman, and to the witnesses for being here today and certainly for your service to our nation. In your opening remarks, and quite often prior to this, we've talked about the American defense industrial base. And certainly coming out of the pandemic, and since then, with the wars raging primarily in Ukraine, we've seen the imbalance that we are having in the industrial base, that we have those risks in the supply, production, and the delivery. And certainly you have started, and we must have a, what I would call more aggressive posture in order to build that up. Because not only does it need to be resilient and reliable, it also needs to be affordable. And certainly starting from behind the finish line, building that up in a quick way is usually not the most efficient. So to date, and this would go to you, Secretary Austin, is what has the department done from where we started a few years ago on this quick and immediate need to build up, in particular, our munitions space? Could you elaborate on some of the steps we've taken?
Yeah, in order to maintain our competitive edge, we're going to have to continue to invest in munitions, and we're doing that. We've done that with your help. As you know, for 24, we asked you for a number of multi-year procurement authorities, and you supported us with that request. Over the last 3 years or so, we've invested north of $75 billion in munitions, which, and it's, I might add, in a supplemental that you just approved for us. There are resources in that supplemental that help, that we apply to the industrial base and help them expand to increase their capacity, so to meet the current demand and the demand in the future. So I want to thank all the members for that. But we put a lot of work into working with industry leaders to, increase capacity, increase capability, and again, with your help, that's been very effective. Now, we also need to work with allies and partners to increase international capacity as well. And my Undersecretary for Acquisition and Sustainment is leading the charge to work with other countries to promote them expanding their industrial base as well. Even after everything is all said and done, as you know, we're going to have to make sure we're producing enough capability to help allies and partners who've dug deep in support of Ukraine and other things, help them replenish their stocks after we've replenished our stocks as well. So.
Well, certainly appreciate that, and sending the right signals to industry so that they are prepared is incredibly important. And that leads me to the next question. The assessment and how we're going to manage at some point, hopefully sooner than later, that we are going to build not only our stocks up to the tune of $50 billion under the aid package, but to help our allies and partners. How are we going to send the correct signals to industry that when we meet that, it's just not going to drop off? Mr. Courtney talked about the submarine base of years ago and what happened that when we abruptly stopped. How are we going to manage our munitions base that we're building up now, but when we backfill, how are we going to handle that?
Well, it's certainly something that we are focused on, and we will continue to work with industry on. There's certainly, when the demand shrinks a bit, we have to be cognizant of the fact that we have to have a capability to rapidly expand if required. Now, the way that we produce munitions, the way that we design production lines, all of those things have to be taken into account. Maybe there are things that we can compress so that we can rapidly expand when called upon to do that. But those are things that we're taking a hard look at, and industry has been very supportive thus far, and I expect that they'll be supportive going forward. We got to send the right signal to them to the point that you're making.
Certainly, and we also have to look at the reserve munitions that we've had in the past and say, is that adequate given the way that Ukraine and other areas of the world have really operated in the last 6 months to 2 years? Certainly, that is incredibly important, and I yield back.
I thank the gentleman. Chair now recognizes the gentleman from Virginia, Mr. Whitman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to thank our witnesses for joining us today. Thanks so much for your service to our nation. General Brown, I want to discuss the cost and exchange ratios between our weapons and weapons of our adversaries. You know, I've talked all the time about the way we win this competition is we have to get more per our dollar than the Chinese get per their yuan or the Russians get per their ruble. And unfortunately today, that's not the case. I know you've supported CCAs and that sort of accumulation of mass where we can do quickly. I think that is absolutely where we need to be. I want to talk a little bit about the unit costs of where we are today. The unit cost for an SM-6 missile is $4 million. The unit cost for a Shahed 136, the kamikaze-style drone that is being used by Iran against Israel, being used by the Russians against Ukraine, is $50,000 a copy. I'm not a mathematician, but this is not sustainable. I want to show the other slide, too, where we talk about the annual production for SM-6 missiles. United States, we build 125 SM-6 missiles a year. If you look at the production of the Shahed 136, 6,000 a year. I'm not a mathematician, but this math just doesn't add up. There's no way that we can counter, both in mass and in cost, what we're seeing from our adversaries. And this is in many other areas around the world, and we've seen this developing capability. I want to make sure that we're doing more to do the right thing to counter these threats. I want to know, why does the Joint Staff, using the Joint Requirements Oversight Council, continue to support exquisite requirements in the face of these expendable platforms that our adversaries are using? Listen, we're going to go Winchester really fast, not just on ammunition, but also on money. Tell me, how are we getting to a point of where we are able to counter these Class 3 UAVs with mass and affordability?
Well, I appreciate your question because I'm in the same spot you are. And that's why I often talk about we have to have capability and capacity. It's one thing to have high-end capability but limited capacity, or low-end capability with a lot of capacity. And we've got to be able to balance across that. And so the examples you used for the SM-6, particularly in you look at the events that happened on the 13th of this month, we used a combination of capabilities to include air-to-air missiles, AIM-9Xs and AIM-120s. And so we got to have a range of capabilities in addition to non-kinetic capability, directed energy. And so that's where my focus is as the chairman. And I am very much focused with the JROC to change that perspective to ensure that we are not just focused on this high-end capability, but we focus on a range of capabilities to ensure we have many opportunities and options that are cost-effective against the threat.
Very good. Thank you. Secretary Austin, President Biden has said in the past that we will defend Taiwan if they are attacked by China. In your estimation, do we have the capability and capacity today to adequately equip our forces to pursue this mission of defending Taiwan?
Our military is the most powerful military on the planet, and not only do we have more capability than anyone else, in terms of the ability to use what we have on hand and to integrate fires and to maneuver responsibly and effectively. We also work with allies and partners and increase their capability as well. You've seen us do that pretty effectively in the Indo-Pacific thus far, and we continue to build upon that. AUKUS was mentioned earlier. This is an incredible capability that's a game changer, and it will certainly add to the overall deterrence in the theater. But there are a number of examples like that throughout. So.
Let me drill down a little bit further. When we look at what we're going to face in that theater, we're going to be operating in a highly contested environment, which means we have to be able to reach Chinese assets at long range in order to degrade that environment to a contested environment where we have a much, much better advantage. Tell me, where are we with magazine depth and capability and capacity currently with long-range precision strike weaponry in that theater?
Well, again, I think when you look at our capability, I think we're in a pretty good place. We never have everything that we want, but certainly it's the mix of capabilities that's important here, and that's our goal, to make sure that we have the right mix of capabilities to ensure that we can be effective.
Gentleman's time's expired. Chair, and I recognize the gentleman from California, Mr. Khanna.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you to the witnesses for your service to our nation. President Sisi of Egypt has said that an invasion of Rafah would have catastrophic consequences, both for the humanitarian situation and for broader regional peace and security. President Abbas has said, quote, "It would be the biggest catastrophe in the Palestinian people's history." And yet this morning I read that Prime Minister Netanyahu is saying, with or without a hostage deal, he plans to go in to Rafah. Mr. Secretary, we're the greatest nation in the world. We're the most powerful nation in the world. This is not a time for vague ambiguities. Will you please commit today and send a clear message to Mr. Netanyahu that he should not go in to Rafah?
What we have emphasized throughout is that they must do what's necessary to protect the civilians in the battle space. A much better job of what we've seen thus far. And as you know, there are north of 1 million civilians that have moved into that space, that if you're going to conduct operations, then those civilians must be accounted for and hopefully moved out of the area. And certainly if they were going to conduct operations, we want to see a different approach to those operations as well. But thus far, we've not seen the civilians moved out of the battle space. And again, what they have said is that their operations will be sequential, where they account for the civilians and move the civilians out of harm's way before they would.
Let me ask you this, Mr. Secretary. Would you oppose it if you don't see a plan? If tomorrow he goes in without a plan, would you oppose that?
Of course I would. Yeah.
And would there be consequences in that case if Netanyahu goes in without a plan?
The consequences, of course, that would be determined by the president.
Would it be on the table to stop offensive weapons if he did that?
Again, that's determined by the president. So.
What would be your military advice if he did that?
I'll never share my military advice that I give to the president with anyone. So.
Let me ask this, though. You would certainly oppose it without a plan. Do you, in your years, and you know how much respect I have for you and your service, do you really believe that there is a conceivable plan of evacuation that would save civilian lives and allow Netanyahu to go into Rafah? Could you come up with such a plan?
I could, but it takes time, and of course we see some signs that they are moving towards that direction, but in terms of all of the things that need to take place before an attack happens, we've not seen a number of things that we believe that will have to happen before.
What are those things that you think need to happen in terms of a plan that would give you confidence that civilian lives would be protected?
And they have a plan. The question is, can you execute? Are you executing the plan, and how much time are you allocating for it?
What are the main concerns you have of what you've, either the lack of plan or lack of execution?
Lack of execution.
And what would be the specifics of what you would want to see that they're not doing today?
Making provisions for the civilians wherever you direct them to. Do you have sustainment in that area? Do you have the ability to move them from where they are now to wherever you're going to direct them to? And then are you willing to protect them as you do that? So, the housing, the medical care, all that stuff that needs to be in place. We've seen some signs that some of that's coming together, but clearly not.
And where would they move these million people to? So you're saying before they go into Rafah, they would need to move all the million people out of Rafah who are civilians?
I doubt that they'll move all of them out, but certainly the preponderance of the people, sure. And they can only go north. Because
my time's is almost expired. If there are 300,000 left, I mean, do you have a sense if they were to go in, how many deaths, civilian deaths, we're talking about? Or, I mean, if they were to go in?
Well, there have been far too many deaths, civilian deaths already, and we certainly, if they were to go in, we certainly would want to see things done in a much different way. And the number of civilian deaths would depend upon what they're doing and how they're doing it. But again, the two things aren't.
Gentleman's time's expired. Chair, and I recognize the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Scott.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I ask unanimous consent to submit for the record an article from Financial Times dated April 28th, 2024.
Without objection, so ordered.
Titled, Western Banks in Russia Paid 800 million euro in taxes to the Kremlin last year. Figures represent a fourfold increase on pre-war levels and come as profits jump at European lenders still in the country. And Mr. McCord, I know you've gotten away without questions, but since your degree is economics and with a master's in public policy, I'm going to come to you with part of this. In this article, one of the paragraphs reads, Western lenders have benefited from the imposition of sanctions on most of the Russian financial sector, which has denied access to the SWIFT international interbank payment system. That made international banks a financial lifeline between Moscow and the West. Secretary Austin, when you started, you said this is a choice between democracy and autocracy. I agree with you 100%. Russia has faced sanctions from the U.S. and our European allies. Those sanctions have in many ways been ignored. India has certainly bought oil from them, skirting sanctions, and we talk about China. We expect that from China. I would have hoped that India would have supported democracy a little better than they have. My question, Secretary McCord, is how do the Department of Defense and U.S. interagency partners and the militaries of our European allies coordinate to ensure the sanctions enforcement? And how does Ukraine win if the sanctions are not enforced and Russia's economy is allowed to continue to grow?
Mr. Scott, I would say from the start, the administration's approach on Ukraine has been emphasized interagency. Treasury and state in particular have the lead on some of the items you mentioned, export controls and sanctions. But we have between military assistance, security assistance, economic assistance, humanitarian, export controls, and sanctions, applied that whole of government approach. You're citing, I think, some of the, if you will, human nature problems that you have of incentives around the world to try and evade these for individualized gain, perhaps. But I know that Treasury in particular has worked hard to have a effective regime on the front.
Half my time's gone, Mr. McCord. I appreciate your answer. I respectfully disagree with you. I think that the Biden administration could have done more to enforce the sanctions, and I think that our European partners could have done more to enforce the sanctions, and I think that if Russia's economy was not growing, then Russia would not have been able to reconstitute its military and its military industrial base the way they would have, and it would not be costing the Ukrainians what it is in people, and it would not be costing the world what it is in support financially and with weapons if the sanctions had been enforced. General Brown, what is the impact on the battle space when sanctions are not enforced?
Well, not being an economist, but being a warfighter, I think the key part I would highlight to you is the access to capability on either side. And that can determine the outcome of a military conflict.
The quantity and the quality of the weapons that your opponent has because of the money they have. Is that a safe answer?
That's a fair statement.
That's my concern with the sanctions not being enforced, not just by the Biden administration, but by our European partners as well. Do you have the necessary authorities to take military action against the shadow fleet of vessels that's illegally transporting Russian oil and funding Vladimir Putin's war?
That is not something that we are, from an authority standpoint, that we are, as a military, focused on right now. I mean, we've been focused on supporting Ukraine, and we work closely with the interagency on how we identify to address.
I have a tremendous amount of respect for you, General Brown, and you too, as well, Secretary Austin. But I will tell you, supporting Ukraine means defeating Vladimir Putin in Russia. And if we're going to defeat Vladimir Putin in Russia, then we have to do two things. One is we have to enforce the sanctions so that his economy will fail and he cannot continue to reconstitute his military and build the weapons that he is and supply the weapons that he is. And the other thing is we've got to be willing to punch him back inside Russian territory. And so when I see a Biden administration that won't enforce the sanctions and our European allies not enforcing the sanctions, and then when Ukraine hits Russia in Russia, Biden saying, please don't do that anymore,
That's
a problem.
Chair now recognizes the gentleman from Massachusetts, Mr. Keating.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank our country's leaders in defense for their service. 8 days ago, I was at the Polish-Ukraine border visiting with our 82nd Airborne. We were doing a logistical job that no other country in the world could do, and thank them for their service. 7 days ago, I spent nearly an hour in Kyiv with President Zelensky. During that time, we had a far-reaching conversation, but time and time again, the most important thing he hammered in to all of us, there's only 4 of us, bipartisan group, but was the need for air defense. You know, in Ukraine, they have an air defense. In Kyiv, their second largest city, was getting pummeled as we sat there, Kharkiv, with major attacks. He thanked us for the supplementary package, but can you tell us what we're able to do to help Ukraine's air defense? They're a resilient country. They're producing their own armaments in the midst of a war. but what can we do to improve that air defense?
Well, certainly, thanks, sir. And first of all, thanks for visiting, and thanks for your support, and along with all your colleagues to get the supplemental approved. That was a big measure of assurance to our colleagues there in Ukraine and to our allies in NATO. So, as you know, I convene some 50 countries every month to talk about how we're going to continue to provide security assistance to Ukraine at scale and speed. Air defense has long been one of the things that we have emphasized over and over again. When people were talking about other capabilities, we continue to emphasize that this is what Ukraine needs most. And that's playing itself out to be true as we watch Russia continue to launch missiles that have been supplied by North Korea, drones that have been supplied by.
I'm sorry to interrupt, Secretary. Do we have the assets in place, Patriots missile systems in particular, among that 56-member group to do more in immediate sense?
There are countries that have Patriots, and so what we're doing is continuing to engage those countries. I have talked to the leaders of several countries, myself, here in the last 2 weeks, encouraging them to give up more capability or provide more capability, and so we're going to stay with this. And I talk to the Minister of Defense of Ukraine every week. And so he is clearly aware of what we're doing, engaging others, and looking around the world to try to get additional capability. But
well, you have our commitment and my commitment as I talk to our allied leaders, which I do several of them every week in my 2 capacities in committees. So I'll continue to emphasize to them the importance of doing that too. One other quick question, just to expand a little bit on what Representative Khanna had just said. Few people in the world, I think, know as much as you do about the difficulties and challenges of urban warfare. I believe you have, and I know the President has talked about lessons learned that we've learned as a country ourselves. You talked about some of the military logistical issues. Can you just briefly, in the short time here, there are other issues too in lessons learned in those types of warfare situations, and they affect the civilian population too. Can you just briefly tell us what you've learned?
It's clearly one of the lessons that we've learned is that you have to make sure you're doing all you can to protect civilians, and because if you don't, then you'll create a longer-term problem for yourself as some of those civilians then turn against you in the future. And so we've emphasized that a number of times to our colleagues and continue to do so. And I talk to my counterpart in Israel on a weekly basis. We've talked some 40 plus times since October 7th. And these are things that we continue to hammer home. But yeah, I think it's an imperative.
Yeah, and I must say, your constant efforts all through this, given the fact you overcame some of your own health issues, is really extraordinary. And I want to thank you for that, and I yield back.
Chair now recognizes the gentleman from Tennessee, Dr. Desjardins.
Thank you, Chairman. I thank the witnesses for their service and appearing here today. General Brown, has the need for land-based leg of the nuclear triad decreased since the decision was made in 2014 to recapitalize the ICBM fleet?
No, it is not.
Okay. Since that time, China has undertaken what multiple STRATCOM commanders have described as a breathtaking expansion of their nuclear arsenal, including a massive investment in silo-based ICBMs. Do you think that strengthens the case for modernizing our ICBM fleet?
It does, and I would say just when you think about our complete nuclear portfolio, not only our ICBMs, but also with our maritime-based capabilities, but also our bombers, all those play a role. Particularly when you think about the aspect of not only you have a PRC that's advancing, but you also have Russia as a nuclear threat as well.
Okay, so to be clear, it's your best military advice that we'll need an ICBM capability for the foreseeable future. Is that correct?
It is, because that it's all part of the triad, and each part of the triad actually plays a key role to ensure that we're able to not only our strategic deterrence, but the extended deterrence it provides for our allies and partners as well.
Okay, thank you. Secretary Austin, I agree with your sentiments that Ukraine is morally right in its resistance against Vladimir Putin and the Russian army. However, I don't think that alone should guarantee United States assistance to carry on this fight in perpetuity without any clear, coherent plan or strategy. And these feelings are shared by my constituents in Tennessee, and I think their frustration is building as the question of what the end game is here continues to go unanswered. Can you help us today describe how things are going to turn out better in the upcoming 8 months? We're over 2 years into this war. We've contributed a lot of money. We've just approved another $61 billion. How do you see this playing out over the next 6 or 8 months?
Yeah, thank you, sir, and thanks for your support with the supplemental. We've been clear from the very beginning that what we want to see is a democratic, independent, and sovereign Ukraine that has the means to defend itself and deter aggression going forward. Now, there are some things in the immediate term that I believe that Ukraine needs to be able to do. One is to maintain access to the Black Sea because, as you've seen here recently, they have managed to continue to export grain, using the Black Sea corridor. They also have to defend in the north and east, where we see Russia mounting increased small attacks and probably maybe are looking to mount a larger attack in the north and east. That's their industrial base, so they have to support that. And then the third thing I think they need to do is to place additional pressure on Crimea. As you know, Russia is using Crimea as kind of a transit zone to push up supplies and personnel in support of their efforts in southern Ukraine and eastern Ukraine. So again, our overall goal is to make sure that Ukraine, at the end of the day, remains a democratic, independent, and sovereign state that can defend itself.
Okay, and that doesn't really answer the question as far as a strategy. Maybe I didn't ask it directly enough, but I mean, as far as an end game, do we see a peace settlement? Do we see outright victory? How long will it be before they come back to the well? We just did $61 billion. There's been a lot more prior to that. What can we tell people? I mean, the president actually did try to explain this a little bit last week in response to the aid package. He was on TV, or at least a visible press conference, where he tried to describe it. We've been imploring the DOD and the administration to tell the American people why this is so important, why this investment is there. So what is, in your opinion, the end game timeline? When will it be needing more money? And what's victory look like?
As is the case with most conflicts of this type, it ends with some sort of negotiation, and again, if that happens, when that happens, we want Ukraine to be in the best possible position to be able to achieve its goals and negotiate for the right things. It's up to Ukraine when that happens and what they choose to agree to or not to. Our goal is to make sure that they have the security assistance to be able to continue their fight to protect their sovereign territory.
Gentleman's time's expired. Chair now recognizes the gentlelady from Michigan, Ms. Slotkin.
Hi, Mr. Secretary, Chairman, Mike, good to see you all. I want to ask a question a little bit different than my peers that comes from looking forward at threats. Mr. Secretary, your job as the Secretary is to deal with everything that's going on in the world, and it's messy right now, but also to look at future threats. And I want to put on the table this idea that the United States is poised to let in a huge flood of Chinese electric vehicles into the United States. In the European Union, they let in their first Chinese EV in 2021. They now have almost 25% market share. So all the cameras, light detection, LiDAR, radar, data collection, cameras, all the stuff that we have concerns about even putting on our military vehicles, right? Chinese origin equipment we would never put on our military vehicles are now poised to be flooded into the United States, driving around everywhere, collecting data on our military bases, on our key infrastructure. As someone who develops our war plans on other states, you can imagine how interesting that data might be to adversaries. So I have a few questions. I asked similar ones to the Secretary of the Army when she was here. They're not gotcha questions. I'm a CIA officer who is trying to process that we're concerned about data, who owns the data of a thing like TikTok, and the idea of a fleet of vehicles coming into the United States collecting all this data that's housed and handled by the Chinese Communist Party really bothers me as a national security issue. So I have just a series of questions. They're not gotcha questions. They're just legitimately, would we want a potential adversary to have high fidelity 3D maps of every military base and installation in the country?
We would definitely not want that.
Would we want a potential adversary to have high-fidelity maps of infrastructure such as power plants, ports, highways, and bridges?
Absolutely not.
Would we want any potential adversary to hack into ground vehicles and pilot it remotely or disable a vehicle in the United States?
No.
Would we want a potential adversary to be conducting cyber espionage, collecting sensitive intelligence through any phone or Bluetooth-enabled device on a ground vehicle?
No.
Okay, you get my point here. I think the thing that I'm concerned about is that the United States, we're a free market economy. We value that. We're good capitalists. But in today's day and age, some of the most dangerous collection goes on through commercial means. And obviously, I'm from Michigan. You don't have to guess why I'm asking about this, because we are making the American vehicles where the data is housed here. We asked for a report from the Department of Defense a year ago about the national security implications of Chinese connected vehicles. We have not gotten that report. I know your congressional affairs people are behind you. I'd ask that we actually see that report, because this is about preventing future threats, not just dealing with the admitted mess that we have around the world. Changing gears, I just have to ask, we had General Kurilla, the head of CENTCOM, here in front of our committee a few weeks ago, and I asked him, as one of our most decorated officers who got shot 3 times in Mosul, has served in Iraq, has served in tough places, what is the military strategy for Rafah? Can you articulate the Israeli military strategy for going into Rafah?
I'd have to let the Israelis articulate that strategy.
Have they provided it to you?
We've gotten some concepts, but in terms of detailed plans.
Okay, so no, we haven't gotten the military plan. For the pier that's being set up, as I understand it, as many as 1,000 U.S. uniformed officers are going to be involved in setting up that pier. A smaller number will be resident there. If we are shot at, if more artillery is shot at us, who is responding, and with what operating procedures is that military responding?
General Brown and I have spent quite a bit of time with General Kurilla working through our force protection plan, and I'm confident that he's put the right measures in place.
Will the Israelis be responding if the United States is shot at?
The Israelis will provide additional security in the area. That's right.
I just think, given the differences I think we have with the Israelis on civilian casualties, we better get right clear about what the response is going to be when we are shot at, since I don't think many Americans feel that it reflects the same values that we have here. Thanks very much.
Ladies' time's expired. Chair, and I recognize the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Gates.
Let's stay on the same subject. Ms. Locken just said there'll be about 1,000 U.S. service members operating a pier system off of Gaza. How many of them will have guns, Mr. Secretary?
Well, typically all of the deployed service members carry guns, and they have the ability to protect themselves if challenged.
So if someone from land in Gaza shoots at our service members who are on the $320 million pier that we're building, you're telling me our service members can shoot back?
They have the right to return fire to protect themselves. Now,
well, do we think that's like? So now I want to move to the likelihood that you think someone from land in Gaza might shoot at our service members on this pier. Do you think that that's a likely scenario?
That's possible, yes.
This is a very telling moment, Mr. Secretary, because you've said something that's quite possible that could happen, right? Shots from Gaza on our service members, and then the response, our armed service members shooting live fire into Gaza. That is a possible outcome here so that we can become the Port Authority and run this pier. Right?
That's correct. You know, I expect that we will always have the ability to protect
Don't you think that counts as
ourselves.
boots on the ground? President Biden told the country that we weren't going to have boots on the ground in Gaza.
And we won't.
Okay, but you guys parse the distinction between, like when Americans think boots on the ground, they think Americans in harm's way or engaged actively in a conflict. You guys seem to be sort of saying that boots on a pier connected to the ground, connected to service members shooting into Gaza, doesn't count as boots on the ground?
It does not.
I think you're going to find the American people have a different perspective on that. And if we're going to have people shooting into Gaza, we probably should have a vote on that pursuant to our war powers. But I want to bring us now closer to home and the F-35 program. Is the F-35 program a failure?
No, it's...
Okay, so let's go over how much does an F-35 cost?
Well, it depends on the variant, but...
100 million? Safe to say? 100 million a copy? Okay, so we just had the Air Force in here, and I said, what percentage of these F-35s are fully mission capable? And they said 29%. Do you have any basis to disagree with that assessment?
I don't have any basis to disagree with the Secretary.
So at 100 million a copy, 29% being fully mission capable, does that seem low to you?
It's a complex airframe, and again, there are a number of reasons why a platform could be not operational at any one given time. But
right, but I mean, how many?
Having said that, it is one of the best aircraft in the inventory.
The best aircraft in the inventory. Well, Mr. Secretary, there's a GAO report that takes a very different view. Mr. Chairman, I seek unanimous consent to enter the GAO report entitled F-35 sustainment cost will continue to rise while planned use and availability have decreased.
Without objection, so ordered.
It reads, cost to sustain the F-35 fleet keep increasing from $1.1 trillion in 2018 to $1.58 trillion in 2023. Yet DoD plans to fly the F-35 less than originally estimated, partly because of reliability issues with the aircraft. The F-35's ability to perform its mission has also trended downward over the last 5 years. Is there any of that in the GAO report that you disagree with?
I don't, no.
Okay, so how many $100 million paperweights do we own?
I would not categorize the F-35 as a paperweight.
Well, if it's not mission capable, if it's, what do we just stare at it and admire it?
We continue to work to make sure that we get our aircraft operational and continue to I
don't know. Don't you think at 100 million a clip, more than 29% should be fully operational? And if the fact that we can't get them operational, you know what Secretary Kendall said when he was sitting in that chair? He said the core root of the problem is that we had let Lockheed Martin build this thing, and then we gave Lockheed Martin the full system performance contract. And they keep bilking us, according to the GAO, and we sit around staring at a $100 million airplane that can't fully perform the mission, and you're sitting here telling me it's not a failure. Just own up to it, Mr. Secretary. Just say, this airframe has not delivered, it's too costly, it's not being utilized as we should, and we should never again make the mistake of doing a full system performance contract with the very person who built the aircraft. Could we agree to that?
I agree. In the future, we should have a different approach. I'm sure that Secretary Kendall also
I
told
think
you
the committee is going to
the things
help
that
you
he
move
was
to
doing
that
to get the
approach quite quickly.
Yeah.
Gentlemen's time's expired. Let me give people our situational awareness. Votes have been called. There is a series of 9 votes, 6 amendment votes are 2 minutes. My plan is to continue for about another 15 minutes before we recess and then come back at the conclusion of the votes. The walk-off time will be 12:30. With that, Chair, I recognize the gentleman from Massachusetts, Mr. Moulton.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, you said your budget priorities are near-term readiness, modernization, and support for troops and families. Those absolutely seem like the right priorities for me. Chairman, you've famously said, quote, accelerate change or lose. And of course, you're talking about our pacing challenge, China primarily. But Mr. Secretary, you also explained that your budget, quote, dials back some modernization. Now, how is that compatible with accelerate change or lose?
So those platforms that won't deliver capability before 2030 are the ones that we chose not to invest in this budget. Now, we recognize that we will invest in those programs in the out years, and that'll require an increase in the top line.
Mr. Chairman, most of this committee is in wholehearted agreement that this budget is inadequate, but why would you delay modernization rather than following the lead of the Marine Corps and just cutting old systems, many of which are big and expensive to maintain?
Well, that's part of the dialogue we have with our Congress, and that's what the challenge that I see in some cases where, as we look at the capabilities that we have to have today, at the same time, as we transform the force to the future, and balancing between the two, and that's where the focus has been across the force. This is an area that we got to continue to have dialogue of the things that we were willing to let go of, so we can actually invest in and modernize in the future.
Well, I have no doubt that this is your philosophy. I question whether it is really the focus across the force. I mean, I think with the exception of the Marine Corps, and a bit of credit is due to the Air Force as well here, there's been a real reluctance to divest of old platforms. I mean, I asked this question of Army leadership just last week. I said, give me an example of one old platform that you're cutting to make room for modernization. And the Secretary of the Army used the Future Reconnaissance Attack Aircraft, a future capability. She's talking about cutting a future capability. Can you give me, Mr. Secretary, just a couple of examples of old weapon systems that are big and expensive to maintain that the Army is cutting to make room for modernization?
Well, certainly, I mean, if you had the Secretary of the Army here to speak to that, I'm sure that what she told you is accurate. So I won't challenge that. But there are things like older artillery platforms, like the M777 that we provided to Ukraine, that we no longer use in our inventory to the extent that we were before. That we are, that we're moving out of the inventory. But some of these things that are no longer useful for the Army are useful to us in the next fight. As far as the Army's concerned, we're able to transition those items to partners and allies who need that kind of capability.
Well, let's do that. I mean, let's sell them. Let's get some money, right? But we've got to make money in our budget for modernization, because if we don't accelerate change, not just change at the rate that we're changing right now, but accelerate change, we are not going to be able to keep up with China. And Mr. Secretary, I just want to be clear, you are endorsing the Secretary of the Army's response to my question, name an old system you're cutting, when she named a future system that you've chosen not to invest in.
No, the reason I said what I said was I really don't know the full context of, but to your point, that is a future system and not a system that we would typically look to divest of. The systems that we want to divest are the systems that are too expensive to upgrade, to modernize, or no longer relevant in a future fight. Now,
I mean, we live in a world where $5,000 drones can destroy $5 million tanks. Now, I'm not saying there's never going to be a use for a tank again, but we're still building a lot of tanks. Poland has just agreed to purchase a whole bunch of tanks. I don't know what nation they plan to invade with these largely offensive weapons, but that doesn't seem like a very wise investment for us or our allies. So I would just encourage you. I know there are a lot of tank supporters in Congress. There are a lot of F-35 supporters in Congress. But you've got to come to us with tough cuts, because coming here and just saying we can't modernize is not acceptable. Replicator is a good example of a revolutionary change. But when they came before the committee, I asked them, Ukraine is innovating a lot on drones. Just tell me, when is Replicator program, with our GDP, going to catch up with Ukraine that has 0.7% of our GDP? And they said, at the present pace, we're not. We can't beat China at that rate.
Gentleman's time's expired. Chair, I recognize the gentleman from Nebraska, Mr. Bacon.
Thank you, Chairman Rogers, and thank you to all three of you for being here today. I want to congratulate General Brown on becoming chairman. We were colonels together. 1-stars and base commanders in Europe, so congratulations. My first question is to Secretary Austin concerning the Ukrainian aid. Is it the administration's plan to send long-range ATACMS to Ukraine? I hope it's yes.
We have already done that, sir.
Already done it, so, but the intention is to keep sending more.
Well, we will provide as much capability as we can.
Okay.
So.
I think that we want to ensure that we're sending difference makers. They're not feeding into the gridlock, from my perspective. General Brown, I want to talk about nuclear survivability. You know, for 29 years, we flew the Looking Glass 24 hours a day with a general on board that could take over our nuclear forces of the White House, the Pentagon, or Stratcom was hit. In 1990, we stopped flying that mission and had it on ground alert primarily. We think the threats are back to what they used to be with the behavior of Russia and the behavior of China. And now we have weapons that can strike us in 15 minutes, so we think it's even more imperative to have this capability. What are the plans to bolster our nuclear command and control survivability?
This is Representative, it's an ongoing conversation about how we advance our nuclear command and control and maintain that nuclear command and control in the environment we're operating in today, particularly against the threat. I would also say, as we advance in technology, there's also opportunities to change that approach as well. And so that's where our focus areas are, as we look at combined joint all-domain command and control, how that also feeds into our new command and control as well.
I know there's alternative ways to provide that same capability, but my impression has been, this has been under discussion for years now. I think at some point we need to resolve it and have a plan so that we can, and it's not really for us, it's for Russia and China to know that no matter what they do, they can't catch us asleep and can't decapitate us. And so it seems to me that we should have a plan soon, because I just feel like this has been an ongoing discussion of what we should be doing. So I just want to submit that to you. Back to you, Secretary Austin, on Taiwan. Deterrence starts today, and I'm under the impression we're being told that there's a huge backlog of weapons that we owe Taiwan. One report was $20 billion. What are we doing to expedite getting these weapons to Taiwan?
Well, I stood up a Tiger team to address this issue as soon as we came on board, figure out what the nature of the backlogs was, and then what are the things that we can do to work through those backlogs and get this capability to Taiwan and others, quite frankly, as quickly as possible. They came up with a number of insights. That task force still exists, by the way, and my challenge to them is to continue to work through challenges and obstacles to make sure that we're moving as rapidly as possible. As you know, sir, there are a number of things that go into this equation. You know, industry, industrial issues and challenges. You know, you name it. But again, I think we have been able to move some things forward a bit faster. But this work needs to continue on. We're going to reduce the backlog. I can't predict to you exactly when that's going to be, but I think you know, it's a thing that we'll stay focused on. So.
Yeah, day one of the war is too late, and we just know the best way to stop it is sea mines, harpoon missiles, long-range air defense, and so I think, you know, obviously it's imperative that we expedite those deliveries. My last thing I would like to point out to Secretary Austin, or at least discuss. We put 31 recommendations together to improve quality of life in the military. One of them was a targeted pay raise for E1 through E4. And yet some of the leaders in OSD, I'm not saying yourself, pushed back on that, saying the pay is adequate. But yet we have good evidence that many of our junior enlists are on food stamps, relying on food banks, and we just think we got to do better. And there was an article that came out today, or it was yesterday, that fast food restaurants are paying more than our E4s are getting, who are not married. So we hope that we'll have your support for a targeted pay raise for E1 through E4. And with like 15 seconds left, would you care to comment?
Well, I want to thank you for the support that you've given us to date. You know, I asked you for a 4.6% pay raise for the force in 23. You supported us. In 24, the budget that was just appropriated, we asked you for a 5.2% pay raise. you supported us for that. That's a
Gentleman's
the
time's
largest pay raise in
expired.
20
Chair now
years.
recognizes the gentlelady from New Jersey. My intent is to recognize the gentlelady from New Jersey and the gentleman from Indiana, and then we will recess till about 12:35.
Thank you, Mr.
Carol.
Chairman. And Mr. Secretary General Brown, thank you for coming today. I'd like to start off because in February, I went with a Haas Codell to Rafah, in part to see what was going on because of the concerns over the building humanitarian crisis in Gaza. We then went to see Netanyahu, and I said to him at that time that there was a growing humanitarian crisis which he needed to address urgently. I encouraged him to open up the Erez crossing, to get more humanitarian aid into Gaza. He did not address this in any marked way until the World Central Kitchen bombing in April. At that time, he did begin to address it, but still not nearly enough to stop the ongoing crisis moving into famine in certain parts of Israel. So part of National Security Memorandum 20's requirement is that the DoD weigh in on Israel's certification that they are addressing this humanitarian crisis. And that's coming up in a little bit over a week, as I understand it. Mr. Secretary, can you tell me about your conversations with the Israelis, your discussions about our values and why this is critical, and what the response has been?
Well, this is a point I make frequently with my counterpart, and encourage them to do everything that they possibly can to protect the civilians in the battle space and use the weapons appropriately. Now, this is a professional military, and my expectation and the expectation of our government is that they do in fact do that. So this is again, to answer your question, a conversation that we frequently have, and again, we'll continue to have those conversations because it's really important. In terms of our assessment, the assessment that's upcoming, as you know, the state is working on that assessment, and I'll confer with Secretary Blinken at some point, but we've not had that conversation yet. So.
And along the same topic, we continue to hear Netanyahu say he's invading Rafah. The president continues to push back against that. There still seems to me to be no viable option for a humanitarian corridor or even a place to receive the 1.4 million people in Rafah right now with tents or humanitarian aid. Certainly the vetting process alone, while Netanyahu suggested it would take him 2 weeks to do, I don't think any of our military would suggest that that is enough time. Can you talk about any discussions you've had with the Israelis regarding Rafah and what you believe their war plan there is right now?
Again, I emphasized a number of times that they must do what's necessary to take care of these civilians that are not combatants and move them out of the battle space and take care of them wherever you move them to. And you have to allow sufficient time to do that appropriately. And we've had that conversation a number of times. I have seen them put some things in place, but you and I know that there's a lot more that needs to be done before we can say that they've accounted for these civilians and taken care of them. I've also asked them to do things sequentially. So that must be the first thing that must be done before they consider any other military operations. So.
Thank you. And then changing topic, I've grown increasingly concerned because we've seen some of the Supreme Court cases on abortion, and recently one of those has been EMTALA, the Emergency Medical Treatment and Labor Act, and Title X does not cover that. Title X does not cover what EMTALA calls stabilizing care for our civilian facilities, meaning it's not just the health, it's not just the life of the mother, it's the health of the mother. I remain concerned that our servicewomen are not being given the opportunity or the protections of their health. And that means that in these hospitals, their reproductive organs are not protected. So in other words, the doctors are not required to give them treatment simply to preserve their ability to have children in the future. Have you looked into this, and are we taking any further
steps to protect our servicewomen and give them better reproductive health care?
No, we've not, the reproductive health care policy that we have in place does not specifically address the issue that you raised, but it's a valid issue for sure.
I would recommend you get her an answer for the record because we got to go to Mr. Banks. Gentlelady's time's expired. Gentleman from Indiana is recognized.
General Brown, according to the Blue Star Family's 2023 annual survey of military families, trust in the military is down to the lowest that it's been in 20 years, down sharply nearly 20% since President Biden took office. The poll also says that only 32% of military families would recommend service to a relative. That's down 55% since 2016. The National Independent Panel on Military Service and Readiness poll says that 68% of active military members have witnessed the politicization of the military. And the Reagan Institute poll in November of 2022 says that only 48% of Americans had a, quote, a great deal of trust in the military, down from 70% in 2018. What do you attribute that to?
Well, I appreciate the question, and I'm not sure what I attribute it to. But one of the things I'm focused on, and I highlighted in my message to the Joint Forces, trust is the foundation of our profession. And what I'm focused on is, as a chairman, is that our trust goes through our members, to their families, our local leadership, and to the nation.
You would agree those are disappointing numbers, startling, if they are true,
well,
really fact?
I will tell you that, as a senior military officer, I want the nation to trust us. And when I see numbers like that, it is disappointing. And my goal is to lead by example.
General Milley testified in this room that, quote, I want to understand white rage. What is it that caused thousands of people to assault this building and try to overturn the Constitution of the United States? What do you think he meant by that, and was it appropriate?
I don't know what he meant by it.
Was it appropriate?
I'm not going to comment on it.
General Milley confirmed that he secretly called Speaker Pelosi about President Trump's mental fitness and nuclear command authority. Do you think that's acceptable conduct of someone in your position?
Well, I'll tell you, in my position, what I will continue to do is provide professional military advice.
Would you ever be open to a call with Speaker Johnson about President Biden's mental fitness?
When I talk to Speaker Johnson, I'll talk to him about the things that are tied to
It
making
wouldn't be
military advice.
appropriate, though, would it? Someone in your position.
I'd focus on providing military advice.
General Milley told his aides that President Trump was preaching, quote, the gospel of the Führer. Do you think it's okay for the chairman of the Joint Chiefs to compare the commander-in-chief to Hitler?
In my position, I would...
Really? Yes or no, General?
No.
Is that appropriate? It's not appropriate. General Milley testified in a question to me that he, quote, does interviews regularly with print media, books, documentaries, videos on TV because, quote, it is a part of a senior official's job. Do you agree that talking that frequently to the media is part of your job? Do you talk regularly off the record to book authors?
Since I've been in this position, I haven't talked to a book author, but I do talk to the media off the record.
Okay. General Milley testified to the Senate that he